Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
The internet is slowly turning us into a hive mind. Just think about it. It has become an extension of our mind. We thought it wouldn't affect our individuality, but it does. Through the internet, we're perceiving things as our own thoughts. This is why, since the rise of the internet, mental illness has become so prolific. This is because people have become more confused about their idea of self. Their own identity is being replaced by the hive mind. It is essentially schizophrenic. Our subconscious doesn't realize the internet isn't our own mind, so it slowly gets assimilated. Slowly, all this will converge into one global consciousness and identity. Along the way, it makes some of us crazy, and some of us will reject the internet forever.
Absolutely. I think once everyone gets their Neuralink implants, some people will combine their minds to create a larger hive mind, while others who value individuality will reject the hive mind, but probably still communicate with it.
All, no. Some of us are capable of thinking for ourselves and not desiring the need to be a hive mind. It's entirely possible to filter thoughts and ideas that don't fit with what you believe. Of course, you need something to believe in first to do this.
You are capable of thinking for yourself, yet you're on the internet for how long every day? It's an extension of your mind. You think it's only one way, but it's both ways. It influences you too. It's not a choice. You just slowly become a part of it bit by bit. It shapes you, you shape it. You probably won't even notice. Just like nature, the environment shapes the animals living in it. The internet does the same to minds.
The truth is that it really is shaping us in a way, because we get information from it. And some say that we can still stop that by thinking for ourselves or just walk away from it. But are we doing this? Aren't you here on the internet answering others? The truth is that we could unplug ourselves, but we don't. And that's what's changing us.
Hey, what is X? Pulls out device. Search. It's already too late, especially with tech like Slack and Discord. Think about anonymous image boards and forums. 4chan has been used many times to solve a mystery or shine light on the truth. The epidemic is a good recent example. It's still hard to imagine people or women doing weird things to children.
You were close. It's actually social media which has created the hive mind. The internet, once discovered as a technology, was actually developed with the idea in mind of eventually creating social media. You see, this was all pre-planned. It's called interactive propaganda. You see, back in the mid-20th century days of radio, early cinema, and eventually television, the elites had time to experiment on what worked to control a culture. In the USSR during the 1930s, they learned that school was the most effective tool of controlling a population. This was through influencing the social interactions towards favoring communism. For example, Johnny is an average-looking boy. Sally and Michaela are the prettiest girls in the classroom. Everybody mostly gets along and is from the same neighborhood in Moscow. Step 1. Introduce new people from distant neighborhoods. Mix up the classroom. Step 2. Whether accurate or not, demonstrate Johnny as a non-communist. Incentivize. Ostracism of the boy through deliberate instruction of teachers to time out of the boy. Encourage communist ideas and make sure the children know Johnny is being punished for not being communist enough. Again, whether he actually is or isn't doesn't matter. Johnny is essentially a human sacrifice. He is being made an example of, a demonstration of what bottom rung gets you. Step 3. Make Johnny disappear one day. Choose a new target. Repeat in every grade until culture becomes more competitive and ruthless and very ideologically communist. The elites discovered that this was possible by creating an artificial community, by forcing people together for 8 to 12 hours a day. After World War II, when they developed the internet, they quickly realized the technology's potential. The meta-school environment can be performed on a mass scale using the internet. People can be forced around each other 24/7 with no breaks, and this meta-school includes everyone on Earth. I forgot to mention one step. Incentivize Sally and Michaela. most of all the students using rewards to shun Johnny. By having the most popular students do the most damage, the other students will fall in line. This is like having the TikTok stars, who are presented as, "Local kids just like you became celebrities, they're just like you," psychologically subliminally implying that they are the local popular kids in your very own local community. Have them all shill. This is the Sally and Michaela aspect of the school communism platform. Have Sally and Michaela shill against Johnny, and other kids psychologically yearn to do the same. The strategy behind this process is actually based on a phenomenon known as over-socialization, as I mentioned in the previous post, creating a non-organic and large community through forced busing for a ludicrous 8 to 12 hours a day in a small space over-socializes people. It triggers stronger emotional reactions, more neediness, think Simpson's neediness for McQueen's attention, and makes them beg for peer approval, particularly for Sally and Michaela to pay attention to them. There are smaller things to over-socialization you can look up, but those are important factors. What social media has done is created a 24/7 form of school, in which the whole world goes to the same school. You can all interact with each other as if you were sitting in desks next to each other. This is also why the phenomenon of gang stalking has grown so severe over the last decade. Rumors can be spread about a person everywhere at lightning speed. The same is true for any ideas to instantly be spread. I want you to go on TikTok and look at how severe this all has gotten. It consists of young girls singing about porn, WAP, Nicki Minaj and Anaconda, Megan Thee Stallion and all her music, 34 plus 35 by Ariana Grande, and all these songs are danced to in what can only be described as stripper clothing, very provocatively by making humping gestures. These are all signs of vast over-socialization. People were not meant to sit in classrooms 12 hours a day, and people were not meant to speak to each other 24 hours a day. I will now describe how school led to mass literacy, which in our media has always been heralded as a good thing, but which actually serves only one purpose: the dissemination of propaganda before the age of cinema, radio, and television, back when propaganda has to be mass-printed in text. School encouraged the ease of dissemination of propaganda even after you leave the school environment as an adult. Now for my next post, I will discuss the controlled, purposeful collapse of the USSR as a way to pave the way for internet infrastructure development, unimpeded by Cold War bureaucracy. Notice that the internet became public right in the years when they were doing their collapse charade. The USSR and the Eastern Bloc provided an issue for developing fiber optics and other infrastructure. It presented trade issues, connectivity issues. An undeveloped country like China, though communist, presented none of the above issues. Everything could be built from scratch. There was also not the political aspect with China. The world needed to be much more united for the internet to spread, and so the USSR outlived its purpose. They knocked it down overnight. But the plan was always to let the internet develop and then shoehorn in social media. This was all planned out from the 1980s onwards. They realized the Iron Curtain had to be lifted for the economy to naturally roll the internet in evenly. And poof, the USSR evaporated. This was entirely artificial. In fact, the USSR itself was entirely artificial, especially after World War II. Despite being one of the best farming land countries on Earth, they secretly were bringing in all their food from the USA and the West. Their entire economy was nothing but a golem, kept alive by the elite to make the world afraid. But it was all fake. It was the corpse of Frankenstein's monster used to scare the villagers into submission. So when the next phase, social media, of the elite's plan was ready to roll out, the older phase, Second Red Scare, was rolled up and packed back in its truck, as if it were an exhibit at a carnival. Have you traveled recently in the last couple years? Have you noticed that every Zoomer in Europe speaks perfect English? On the island of Cyprus, I noticed something. Most of the Zoomers there not only speak perfect English, but with a perfect American accent. They wear the same clothes, have the same hobbies, and the same jokes. They are Americans in every form. The world over the last 10 years has turned into America. This is the truth of social media. It has created a one-world culture and a one-world language.
I have a theory. Humanity is changing, but not in a way we would suspect. We are changing into a hive mind species. This would explain the rise of the so-called NPCs. They act brainless because they are changing to be brainless. This hive mind works through emotional pheromones. When we pick up on the emotions of others, our brains are starting to align with those emotions. When one of us we relate to gets angry, others start to become angry. When one is outraged, others become outraged. When one grieves, others grieve. I don't think this change has begun recently, though the internet has made it more evident, but when our species discovered civilization. We have always had a hierarchical society, and we actively resist anarchy. We crave law and order. Some are naturally inclined to lead, and others to follow. It's not that different from the structure of an ant hive. Those at the top of the hierarchy are beginning to realize this as well. Once you understand this, controlling the masses is simple. You just exploit the emotions of the population, and they fall in line. What do you think /x/? Is this the future of humanity? Will individuality be wiped out from our species eventually? Is this a good thing, or is it just the next positive step on the ladder? Life has always been about having more offspring by surviving slightly better thanks to tiny genetic changes. But humans reproduce more for random-ass reasons that change every few decades. Plus, we only struggle against ourselves for the most part. So to me, humans abandoned genetic evolution as soon as we gained higher thinking, and survival and reproduction was no longer linked to physical traits or instinct. So we are never going to change again. The only change we have now is technological advancement. Other evidence I have is the breaking down of the family structure. We are becoming detached from the idea that blood is thicker than water, and are moving towards the idea that blood is made of water. We see our friends as family, often elevating them above family. Our social circles, more and more humans are putting the well-being of their family to the side in favor of being accepted into larger, less personal groups. Just look at the devotion people are giving to large outside groups, followers of a similar political ideology, for example, despite the negative impact it may have on their family unit. It's starting to look more like the relation a drone has to its colony. This is true to a large degree, but it actually strengthens this theory. We live extremely social lives now. Our entire existence revolves around how we are perceived to others. Those who are better perceived are more likely to reproduce, and the best way to be seen as a desirable person is to be social and not stir the pot, so to speak. If you argue against the accepted norm, you will be rejected by the majority, greatly limiting your reproductive prospects. This has been true since the beginning of civilization, and it's more prominent now than ever. Other evidence comes from scientists themselves. One speculation on how bees developed their hive mind is that they started cooperating. They were social creatures and began cooperating as a group to further their survival chances, eventually changing into the hive mind we see today. We are already doing this. Day in, day out, we go to work and repeat our assigned task. We work together as a group to achieve the goals of the company. This is becoming more prominent in all aspects of our society. Governments are leaning more towards socialist ideals, individuals working together for the betterment of the group. Our schools are even driving us towards this. They grade our abilities and push us towards the fields where they can be best utilized. Academics are pushed towards higher education, athletic types are pushed into sports, hands-on types are pushed into tech schools, and the ones with the least potential are pushed to the bottom where they will slave away at mindless jobs. How much choice do we really have in our futures? Do we choose to be a drone or soldier or queen, or is it decided for us whether we consciously know it or not?
The system is artificially pushing people into the least potential category because there wouldn't be anyone to do the slave jobs otherwise. The homeless guy down the street would have been a concert pianist if his parents could afford piano lessons instead of buying crack cocaine. It wasn't that man's choice not to reach his potential. Is a hive mind more fit than what we have now? No, because people require a minimum level of individuality to contribute to the species. I will say, though, that we are selecting for obedience and passivity more so than in the past, due to the schooling system. But it's been that way for 100 years. I do fear that gene editing will allow the elite to finally have their mindless slave race a la Brave New World.
Here is my story /x/. At first I thought I was just overthinking, but this is getting ridiculous. Everyone seems to be oddly cold with me, even my friends. They're so friendly with each other, and when I try to join in, they blatantly ignore me as much as they can. If I say a certain thing that I've literally said only once before, someone is almost guaranteed to give me a weird stare and say, "Why do you always say that?" Or "Why are you so obsessed with that?" Out of all the people I get this from, it's always in the same condescending tone. No friendliness in their voice at all. Just pure disgust. Everything I do is quickly analyzed by anyone who's there, right to my face, whether they're my friend or not. Things like, "Lel, look at how Anon freezes up when he's panicking," or "Lel, Anon has no idea what he's doing." Many times I've even gotten "Anon is so weird." Those exact words, that exact same tone, but said by different people, some who barely even know me. One last weird thing. Once I found a guy on Instagram who some of my friends were friends with, so I decided to follow him. Let's call this guy Soy Jack. Anyways, a few minutes later, Soy Jack messages me saying, "How did you find me? Do I know you?" This was a pretty odd thing for him to say since he had 15,000 followers at the time and way more now. I said something like, "You were in my suggested my friends know you." And he asks me to send a picture of myself, which I did. He has the nerve to text back with, "Don't follow me." A few weeks later, I was with my friends and they started praising him. When I tried to tell them about my experience with him, you guessed it, they completely ignored me. We're not alone.
So I've had this theory for a while now that the decisions of a large portion of the people in the world are controlled or influenced by some kind of hive mind. I originally had this idea when I was working as a line cook and started noticing something kind of odd about people's orders. At the restaurant I was working at, we had this really big menu with a large variety of food. There were, of course, the popular food items on there that would get ordered pretty often throughout the day, and then you'd have the more obscure items that you only hear get ordered on occasions. Well, after I'd been working there for a bit, I started noticing that when someone asked for something that was pretty unpopular, like something that only gets ordered once a week or two normally, we'd suddenly start getting several other orders for that same item throughout that day. Or if someone asked for a weird milkshake flavor combination, you'd have several people get that same combination at different times of the day. Customers would also typically come in at the same time, usually in groups 2 to 4, rarely. Would you just have one person come in to get food? Though I suppose you could chop that up to rushes. After I started noticing these occurrences, I would point them out to my managers, and they thought it was kind of weird too. I've also talked to other people who work at restaurants, and they said they've noticed these things as well. Recently I've been thinking more about this idea. How many people does this have an effect on? Are there possibly multiple forces that are causing these people to act in sync? And am I myself a part of one of these hive minds? So I want to know, have any of you ever noticed signs of a hive mind? And if so, what were they? I'd also be interested in any material that has been made on this subject.
I don't believe that there is a collective consciousness guiding anyone directly. It's more like all life has a singular goal and thus acts in predictable ways. That could make it seem like a group is acting like a colony, when in fact, it's just people commuting to work, or something. It's also possible that the people who like that weird food just act similar in many ways, or that something has influenced their actions, like you see a random video pop up in your recommendation, and the next week, the topic it's about suddenly gets brought up at work. There is no intelligence, but a mind doesn't have to be intelligent. Humans are so interconnected that on the macro scale, we may start acting similar to neurons.
Former grocery store cashier here. Noticed very similar things. It'd be dead quiet at my register for 15 minutes at a time, and as soon as the first person comes up, the next 5, 10 would follow instantly. Also, the same thing as with your obscure orders. We of course had lots of different items, some of which were also obscure and rare to be bought. But as soon as someone buys something I have never even seen go over the register, it would happen again multiple times throughout the day by different people. No, I'm not trying to make myself feel special, but I genuinely believe now most people are not real, actual NPCs. If you really look, you can notice the optical and behavioral patterns. There were lots of people that would come regularly, of course. Obviously, I knew what they looked like and how they'd behave. Now go into the same store a city or two away. It was the same people. Like, not literally the same, but they all had their clones from my store. All the ones that looked very much like the ones from my store would also behave and move in the exact way their almost identical counterparts from my store were. Crazy shit. Right now, I'm thinking probably 2/3 of all people are bots or outright not real. The more I talk to people about this sort of thing, the more common it seems to be. Now, that being said, I don't necessarily think that these people are NPCs with no free will. They probably have their own thoughts and reasoning that go into the actions and decisions that they make. I'm sure that they are still individuals in a sense, but the synchronizations in their decisions can't be ignored. Furthermore, if they are individuals with independent reasons for making the same decisions, how can we know if we aren't also a part of some kind of hive mind, for lack of a better term? I, for instance, via the internet, have been able to meet and communicate with people with similar niche interests and beliefs as my own, and I've noticed that of these individuals and myself, we share more in common than just a few hobbies or philosophical and political opinions, such as habits, experiences, and some trivial similarities like interests in the same franchises, music, even having the same memes saved to our phones. This leads me to wonder if it could be multiple forces leading different groups of individuals to do certain things or act in certain ways. This is why I want to hear any theories any of you may have about this phenomenon.
To be honest, free will is probably not even real. The fact you can hear your thoughts doesn't necessarily mean they're your thoughts. What you said about sharing more than just that niche hobby I have noticed as well. For example, when, at times, someone on this board would tell a little about themselves, their life, and their interests, I oftentimes can tell that I share a bit more than just the interest in the currently discussed topic with them. I might just be an NPC myself. Maybe not like the super common bots you see in downtown Los Santos, maybe more like a side character you don't see that often, but still an NPC. Not sure. I don't think there's really any way of knowing for certain.
There's some kind of collective or hive effect. One time I was dressing to go to a Sunday gathering, less formal than church with music and street clothes, and something loudly popped into my head that said, "Wear purple, pick the purple socks." I wore my purple socks. When I showed up, to my surprise, people were wearing purple everywhere. I wasn't just looking for it. Out of the 100 people or so, at least half had much more purple themed than normal. Socks, scarves, shirts, yoga pants, accessories, you name it. You could blatantly look around the room and see and say, "Gee, that's a lot of purple today." Everybody seemed extra happy that day too, and like they were all sharing in or experiencing the synchronicity.
Event 201, Bill Gates' pandemic drill right before the plague dropped, heavily leaned upon internet censorship to control public opinion, placing more emphasis upon that than actually controlling the spread of infection. Soon we will be unable to discuss it anywhere if we do not make ourselves heard now. Please spread the word. And yes, I agree. It started with extreme partisanship, making people take sides, incorporate those sides into their ego, and now they're easily manipulated and incapable of independent thought. They created good little soldiers and can manipulate average people to defend them even against their best interest by appealing to their ego's identification. If you hate candidate A, you won't question the government because only Karens do that. If you love America and freedom, you will oppose taxing the obscenely wealthy because that's what the other side wants to do. Even if you are living in a shack and these overlords pay you a pittance, it is patriotic to defend corporations and bankers. Technology is being used as a tool for psychological warfare against citizens. The question I can't understand is why don't these people wake up? Get tired of it? Unplug their brains?
When I say I agree with something a conservative would, like gun rights. The other side think I'm their enemy and starts telling me, well, your precious candidate did this. Precious, no. They just assume I'm a conservative because they couldn't imagine holding independent stances on a topic. When I agree with stances that are associated with liberals, like taxing the rich or free healthcare, the other side thinks I'm the enemy. They say things about extreme leftists, Democrats, or, well, so-and-so did this. I'm not a leftist. I don't want communism. I think that the government creates psyops to distract the public, and there are just as many EDPs on both sides. They just assume I'm a liberal because they couldn't imagine holding independent stances on a topic. It never used to be like this. They're erasing the moderates. You used to be able to agree with some of both sides, read the policies of the candidates, and choose which aligned best. Now, there is so much in-group policing that you have to regurgitate every single talking point associated with a party, or you are assumed to be the enemy. It's crazy. It's fucked.
They are an artificial culture, loosely based on last century's rural culture, created by the elite, used as a way of making targeting the culture verbally, argumentatively difficult. As you noticed, if you criticize one aspect, then you must be endorsing the other side's aspect, and vice versa. If the culture was allowed to be monotonous and uniform, opposition to the culture would be harder to misconstrue. But at their cores, both sides of the culture advance the same conditions. For example, the one side advocates what the movie Cuties represents, and they advocate child promiscuity. The other side advocates banning it, covering it all up, and ceasing all discussion of the topic. This actually makes it possible to ignore TikTok, which leaked it to real life as it includes young girls, who are all now being cyber-stalked by grown men. One side wants this all to continue, but pushes it under the rug. The other wants this all to continue, but promotes and advocates it openly. Both choices advance the state of affairs, and all criticism of the state of affairs can be deflected as prudes trying to ban the movie. Conversations about TikTok in society are thus distorted and misconstrued by the time mainstream society hears your complaints. That is why they use this two-subculture strategy.
Good addition to the post. I'm the Anon you replied to, and I agree. Another factor of the two sides of the same coin purchasing a done deal scenario you described is normalization by repeated exposure at fast rates. For example, I remember when those Twitter threads about that movie were popping off. People were condemning it, but by posting screenshots of it, they got people used to the image of sexualization. Each time you see something objectionable, it's still being normalized. People are more and more willing to put up with things that are injustice or evil than ever before, especially the young generation. Things come out into the open about politicians or public figures that would have been a huge scandal, remembered for years if it happened in the 70s, on the front page of the news, for weeks. What do we do now? Voice our frustration into the ethers of the internet, where it slips away like salt tossed into a stream, or meme about it for the next week until something new comes across. Terrifying stuff.
Two sides of the coin. The negative side is most prevalent, of course. Remember to defrag with wholesome and creative content, Anons.
This next story is an allegory for Enkidu, who is the embodiment of man in the natural world.
I've returned to the city after being an outcast for a good amount of time. I just could not belong anywhere, so I went to the only place that welcomed me, the wilderness. But after years of living in the wild, I felt an extreme urge to return. Although I have enjoyed the experience quite a bit and liked the wilderness better than the city, I couldn't help but feel homesick. I was reminded of the chicken sandwiches I used to eat, the hot dogs that I dearly enjoyed, the beautiful buildings that scrape the skies, and the bright and vibrant screens that fill the city, so I decided to come back for a little tour. Immediately after my arrival, however, I was quickly reminded of why I left. People were giving me side eyes wherever I went. I could not find water to drink for free on the street, and whenever I tried to enter a building to find a faucet, I would get kicked out because of what I'm wearing. I also got stopped multiple times by people telling me how my minimal amount of clothing in such hot weather is bad and that I should put on more clothes. I'm not sure how it's bad when I'm covering my genitals, but whatever. If I wanted to eat, there would be no fruit to pick up or animals to hunt. With no other choice, I decided to ask people for food. Many just ignored me, some told me to go away, others just straight up ran away. But I found some really nice people who helped me out. I was able to eat and drink, and I was ready to head back home. I did not want to stay any longer. Before I could leave, one of the people that helped me wanted me to share my experience here. So here I am. Humans are too complex for their own good, and it's absolutely terrifying how entrapping it is to live in cities. You have no access to anything without permission, and you are constantly shamed for doing anything that isn't standard. You're supposed to live like a honeybee, unable to think or act for yourself. Even after escaping, the Hive called for me to come back.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.